Well, decision was made that Joe was going to have to come out from undercover, and I think that what precipitated that was he had gotten the contract to kill Bruno Indelicato, who was the son of Sonny Red, and I think he was supposed to be at that meeting where the three captains were killed, but he didn't go. Joe got the contract, and they decided it was time that he should probably come out. It was getting too dangerous for him. They wanted to try to roll somebody. Joe thought the best candidate would be Sonny Black, who he thought was, pretty reasonable guy. They were trying to figure out who they wanted to go talk to him, and they decided on me because Sonny Black had told Joe before that I had talked to him on several occasions. And he said for an FBI agent, he's a pretty stand-up guy. So they decided I'd be the guy. We had a conference before we did it. And at that conference, we took pictures. It was me and Joe. It was the police agent down in Florida. Joe was also down in Florida and had cases down there. And then I think it was the case agent in New York maybe, but there was three of us. And they wanted to get him alone. Of course, he always had his people under him. He was the captain, so he had people always with him. So we would go out early in the morning and sit in the car. It was summer and hot. And we'd sit in the car, and the surveillance team would be on Sonny's apartment, and there was always people around. So we were there for about 3 days before. In the morning, they determined that nobody was there except Sonny. So then we went, and I banged on the door at the bottom of the steps. And he said, "Who is it?" And I told him it was me. And he very cordially says, "Come on up." So myself and the two other agents went up. He said, "Have a seat." And we sat at his, like a little living room table. So we all sat there. He didn't seem anxious or nervous or anything. He just, "What do you guys want?" And I said, "Do you know Donnie Brasco?" And I can't remember if he acknowledged he knew him or not. He was a tough guy, and he knew how to play the game. I said, "Well, Donnie Brasco is really Joe Pistone. He's an FBI agent." He was like, it was nothing. I mean, he laughed. "Oh, okay." And just like I said anything. I thought he was going to jump up and down, fall on the floor, but he just took it like I was telling him today's Sunday. We got done. If I recall, I didn't have to show him the picture because he didn't say anything that I don't know who he is or anything like that. So I thought that he probably acknowledged the fact tacitly that, he knew who he was. We were leaving, and I gave him my card, and I said, "Sonny," I said, "you know better than anybody what this is going to mean." And he didn't say anything, and I gave him the card. The two agents for me walked down the steps, and I was leaving the door, and he goes, "Doug." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You know better than anybody, I can't do this." We left, and that's the story.
Hey, guys, that was retired agent Doug Fencl. Tell me about the day that he and some other agents went to see the Bonanno-Capo Sonny Black Napolitano and revealed to him that the man he had proposed for membership in the Bonnanno family was really an FBI agent named Joe Pistone, not who he thought was Donnie Brasco. This infiltration by the FBI Bonnanno squad will end with the defection of almost every high-ranking member, as well as the boss, Joe Massino. I have to wonder who was there left to testify against at the end. Joe Massino, he bought his way out partly with money. He say he had like $8 or $9 million in gold bars. Gold bullion was part of a total $12 million settlement he made with the government. And they still left his wife with several pieces of real estate. And he seemed to live out his life in witness protection okay, although he wasn't living high on the hog. I know that. Anyhow, welcome, guys. This is Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Officer and detective and sergeant. And today I, along with some friends, are going to tell you all about the first mafia boss to ever rise up through the ranks of one of the five families and end up a government witness and die in witness protection. So hang on to your headphones. This is quite a ride. 1981, the Bonnanno crime family discovered that one of their soldiers, Donnie Brasco, or associates Donnie Brasco, was really an undercover agent named Joe Pistone. This revelation created an environment of murderous tension within that family for the next decade. During this period of turmoil, Joe Massino will emerge as the undisputed boss of the Bonnanno family. So today we want to look at Joe Massino. Now, here's a former mob guy named Sal Polisi who describes Joe Massino, what he remembers about him. So, I mean, was he real, friendly, kind of overly friendly, almost, slap on your back kind of a guy?
Yeah, he was a jokester, and he had a good personality, a different personality than John Gotti. John Gotti was the quickest, wittiest guy you ever could be around. And when he got with another witty guy, it's like two comedians, And Massino was pretty clever and pretty quick. He was very responsive, and he liked to have a good time. He came to my Sinatra Club a couple of times, but he wasn't the type of guy to sit there and play cards all night.
To be a good mob boss, you probably ought to be quick and witty and be able to get along with people and clever. But he also had to be murderous, too. Sal didn't really talk about that, although he will in a little bit. Joseph Charles Massino was born in Maspeth, Queens, January 10th, 1943. Maspeth, Queens was a working-class neighborhood. It had many Sicilian and Southern Italian immigrant families living there. They'd been there like by this time, it's like their second generation many times living here. Teenager Joe Massino was handsome. He was athletic. He worked as a lifeguard out in Long Island. He was famous for being able to swim long distances. I mean, clear across the East River, I think, and some things like that. He'll get a little paunchy when he gets older. As a matter of fact, he gets really fat by the end. He'll catch the eye of a beautiful Sicilian girl named Josephine Batali. He marries her for life, as normal in this life. Now, she has a brother named Sal Batali, call him Handsome Sal Batali, and Sal Batali will eventually go in to the Bonnanno family along with Joe Massino. They will rise up through the ranks together. He'll trust Sal implicitly for a long time. That relationship will split by the end and deteriorate into a lot of angry and blaming situations. What about his relationship with, was it Handsome Sal Batali, his brother-in-law? Did you know anything about that relationship? They were really close, I understand.
Good-looking Sal. It was his brother.
Good-looking, yeah.
It was his brother-in-law. And then, Sal Vitali was just a couple of years younger than Massino. Massino was like 2 years older than me. I think he was born in 43. I'm 45. So good-looking Sal was like Massino's brother-in-law, and he got him deeply entrenched, in the mob life. Eventually, he participated in murders. I mean, this is what happens, the escalation of crime. You start out with a little bit of crime, Gary, like you were a police officer, detective. Guys start out with a little tiny petty crime. Before you know it, they've moved up to sophisticated crime, violent crime. And that's what Vitali did, yeah.
He left high school in his sophomore year, but that was really just the beginning of his education. He became a really good fence and running numbers and sports book and all that kind of more sophisticated stuff. He really wasn't a guy that was going out and kicking in doors. He wasn't a guy they sent out to intimidate people particularly. He probably did some of that, but he didn't become well known for that. He was more sophisticated. He gets married. They buy a house. He's working as a lunch wagon operator in Maspeth. And this area in Queens, Maspeth, Williamsburg, and Greenpoint had hundreds of small factories and businesses that had a lot of employees. And so, if you ever worked in one, I've worked in businesses, smaller businesses where you don't have a cafeteria or anything. And if you don't take your lunch, there's a lunch wagon often will pull up at noon around there. And the lunch wagon oftentimes will have a parlay card or if you want to play the numbers, they'll have the numbers there. The ones here in Kansas City, I know, had parlay cards. He will work this lunch wagon business. And what you need to know about this lunch wagon business is it was organized already by a capo in the Bonnanno family named Philip Rusty Rastelli. Rusty Rastelli, by this point in time, has organized all of the lunch wagon operators in this area, kind of like they say Cyril Terranova had organized all the pushcart vendors, kind of like Capone organized all the bootleggers, like later, like not Joey Lombardo, like Iupa had organized all the gamblers, all the sports gamblers in Chicago, and then you get them all organized, and they all got a kick up to the boss, and the boss kicks kicks out, to the local guy, and he kicks up to his captain. The captain kicks up to the underboss or up to the boss. And he has actually a real organization. He also is able to extort money from the people who supply the coffee and the food and everything to these lunch wagon guys. And lunch wagon guys, they may have to kick up in order to get a better spot. And he runs it like his own little fiefdom, and that's where he brings Joe Massino into that. Joe Massino, little insight into him. I read about he bought his first house for $16,000. He paid 5% interest. It was pretty good back in the 60s. He's making $98 a month payment. How'd you like to have a house payment of $98 a month? Of course, then you'd have to be living on about $5,000 a year, too. Some people called him Joe Wagons or Joe Bagels. Rusty Rastelli liked him, brought him in, gave him a good spot close to his house so he didn't have to go very far. He was a real hustler. Joe was a worker. He even sold Christmas trees during the Christmas season in order to help pay for some medical bills that when his children were born. So he was a hardworking guy. He was an associate during this time, and Rastelli was really had him spotted be a made man eventually. He just got to pay his dues, as we all do, wherever we work. He used to call him Unc. It was his mentor, and they called him Unc. I know here in Kansas City, they called Nick Savella. Some of them called him Unc or Zio, which is Italian for uncle.
Gary, when I got to New York, shortly after I got to New York, I got assigned to the Bonnanno squad. Ironically, it's really not the first time I've heard Joe Massino's name. Right couple squads down from us was the truck hijacking squad, and that was a huge problem in New York at that time. They were stealing everything that wasn't tied down, and of course their main target was Joe Massino. They had at least probably 20 agents on that squad, and one of the lead agents was Pat Colgan. I think you may have we're going to talk to him, but he was probably one of the best agents in the office, and it was like the mastermind agent versus the mastermind gangster truck hijacker. And they would pick off people around Joe that worked in his crew, but they could never roll any of them over. They were always very loyal to Joe, so they never talked about him at all. But as I told you, when I got to New York, I was on the Bonnanno squad, and shortly thereafter we discovered a social club. It was right on the line between Little Italy and Chinatown, and it was run by Nicholas Marangello. I know you've heard his name before, Gary. He was the street boss for Rusty Rastelli during the late 70s, and it was a social club. You only came there for business. There was no playing cards, watching TV. If you had to come talk to Nicholas, you just come get your business done and leave. So we had a surveillance there. I know you're familiar with these surveillances, Gary. You've been on 100 of them and probably supervised 100 of them. But it was the first time I saw him. We were about a block and a half away with a telescopic lens. And first time I saw him was at that social club. We didn't even know he was made yet. And you've been on these surveillances. You can tell, when you watch these people long enough, you kind of know the pecking order, who's paying deference to the other. And Joe was well respected right out of the chute. So he started showing up, and he'd walk in with a couple of his guys, and then he'd come right out again, and he'd have face-to-faces with Nicky Marangello, and he knew by right then that he had to have his button. He had to be a made guy. You can't do that kind of thing. Serious conversations. And it was funny because Nicky was kind of the diminutive guy, well-dressed, tie, suit, that kind of stuff. And Joe was kind of a slob. He wore sweatpants, white T-shirt. His hair was always a mess. Yeah, so he would go down there periodically and have these serious talks with Nicky. And as an aside, there's probably 6 of us working the surveillance. We were taking pictures of Joe Pistone and Donnie Brasco going in and out just to show you how deep he was. None of us knew who he was. As a matter of fact, when some of these photographs we took him, I took to one of my informants who would sometimes go in the club, and we tried to identify him. So at him deep. But anyway, as you know, we try to talk to as many of these guys as possible. As soon as they got their buttons, or as soon as we found out they got made, we try to go out and talk to them. And I could never catch Joe. I was looking for him and never could seem to catch him. A month or two later, one of the case agents that had him on a truck hijacking case called me and says, "Listen, I got Joe coming in this afternoon if you want to talk with him for photograph, fingerprints, handwriting, that type of thing." So he came in, and he calls me, says, I got him down here. So I went down there, and in my mind's eye, by looking at the surveillances, I'm looking at this big, unkempt, kind of a gruff, tough guy, always in this T-shirt. But when I went into the interview room, there was a guy sitting there, had a sport coat on, hair all coiffed, relaxed and confident. And I walked in, and he says, hi, Doug. And I said, man, I've been looking for you all over town. And he said, I heard. Well, here I am. What's on your mind? And of course, I congratulated him on getting his button. And he was a very amiable guy, kind of soft-spoken, polite, surprisingly so. It's funny some of these guys, when you talk to them and you talk about the mob, they say, well, I never heard of that before. I don't know what you're talking about. But Joe he'd just smile at you. He wouldn't disrespect you with the fact, he wouldn't tell you, I don't know anything about it. He would just smile at you. And the other thing, as we talked, one of the things that I noticed, his demeanor was very disarming. You know, when you talk to guys like John Gotti or Sonny Red, Bonanno-Capo, Sonny Black, any of those guys, they're gregarious guys and they're usually respectful, but you always sensed underneath it all that there was danger. Like, you know what, this guy could really hurt you if you wanted to. With Joe, you know, maybe it was just my naivete, but I sure didn't get that with him. And when all was said and done, when you put these guys all together, he may have been the most cunning and dangerous of them all. I mean, you think about all the murders and hits he was involved in, spectacular stuff. And yet, when you meet him, you would never think that he was capable of that kind of stuff. But anyway, I testified against him in that case. I don't remember if I talked to him at that time or not. And then shortly thereafter, I was transferred and left New York and thought I'd never hear from him again.
People started as Big Joey, as Joey Massino got into his 20s and 30s. He lost that athletic build and got pretty heavy, got pretty fat, and he started calling him Big Joey. Calling him Big Joey for a variety of reasons, partly because of his weight and also because of his criminal abilities. You know, he's like Big Joey. He brought the numbers and loan sharking and sports book making and fencing and hijacking into his lunch truck business, as well as some of the others. And he had what you need for a good career in the mob. He had intelligence, he had the ability to learn and earn, and a willingness to murder in the end. I told you, people that liked him, seemed like he was a nice guy, didn't seem like a killer in his eyes, but he will prove out that he has a willingness to murder, and somehow Rastelli saw that in him. His brother-in-law, Sal Vitale, tried the straight life for a little bit, found that wanting. He quickly joined Big Joey, or Joy Wagons, in the lunch wagon numbers, sportsbook, hijacking, and fencing business. They recruited other thieves from the neighborhood. They were doing scores, and they were handling the swag. They got swag from the first storage businesses and the leather coat cleaning places and coffee warehouses and wholesale jewelry locations. You know, coffee warehouse, that coffee would be easy to sell to your fellow lunch wagon drivers right away. Truck hijacking, get a whole whole truckload of cases of coffee cans. I mean, that would be extremely valuable. Cigarettes, got in the cigarette business, stolen cigarettes. Here's a story from a retired FBI agent named Patrick Cogan, who was assigned to the Bonnanno squad during that time. He knew Joe. He was a guy, Patrick Cogan told me he was a guy, one of the guys, main guys that worked with Joe Pistone and knew he was out there undercover. And all the agents didn't know that he was out there undercover during this time. They were taking pictures of him and then trying to show him around, saying, does anybody know who this guy is? He said he used to meet him out on the Long Island Expressway, and one of them, whoever got out there first at a particular intersection or mile marker, would pull over like he had car trouble and raise his hood. So the other one would pull up behind him, and then they'd walk up to the car and, they'd talk, converse a little bit, and hand forward, back and forth any papers or anything they needed to do, and then split up. I mean, it was brilliant, that kind of a deal, because first of all, most of these mob guys, if they were driving down the Long Island Expressway, they would be by before they even saw it was anybody that they knew, and probably wouldn't even look over. I never do particularly. Might look a little bit. It looks like there might be trouble, but other than that, I don't hardly look. So it'd be really unusual anybody to catch them meeting a real live FBI agent that somebody might know. Now, here's what Patrick had to say about Joe Massino.
Joey Massino was quite charismatic, actually. He had a lot of nicknames. He had Joey Bagels. He had Joey Coffee because he ran a coffee truck that sold bagels and rolls and sandwiches in, I want to say, mainly the Queens area. And he was well known in the Queens area at construction sites, at break time for factories. He would drive his catering truck to those different locations and sell whatever he could to the people that were on break or do numbers.
Right. Now, like here in Kansas City, we had several guys with those lunch wagons that would hand out parlay cards and then pick them back up.
Yeah, same thing. That's how he got his start. Plus, he was a relative there of Rusty Rastelli. I'm not sure of the biological connection, but it was Rastelli who urged Joe Massino to move up.
So he verifies it was Rusty Rastelli who was the mentor of Joey Massino. You know, we all have mentors at our work many times. You know, some places, I think in New York PD, they call him your rabbi. Kansas City Police Department, we call him your stick. You know, I had a guy who was my stick, that if I wanted a better job somewhere, then he'd been on longer, he was higher ranking than me. You know, he would arrange and see if he couldn't give me that job, or he would bring me into some place where he worked. So he'd have somebody in his operation that he trusted who was his friend. And so that's how it works. And Rusty Rastelli was Joe Massino's stick in the mafia. Joe will recruit other lunch wagon owners to do some of this hijacking, get involved with the numbers and the parlay cards and that kind of thing. And I got to interview a Sicilian immigrant named Jack Amato, who became one of those lunch wagon drivers and was really friendly with Rastelli. He was more friendly with Rusty Rastelli's brother, Marty, but they liked Jack Amato, and he put him to work under Joe Massino.
You know, and the guy was, oh, can I get something? Can I get what you can guess? You know, to get hot coffee, hot chocolate, you know, everything. Sandwich, hot and cold. Everything was going good. My relationship with Joe Massino. You know, we were like family. But then I got very close to Marty Rastelli. That's the boss's brother.
Marty.
And he got to like me a lot, you know. Then his brother Lou got to like me too. Then the nephew Lou, which was named after his father, he was like a son to Rastelli. So we got along very good. Being that he had this JJ Deli, you know, we bought sandwiches from him. So Rusty helped him. All the trucks would go buy sandwiches from him. You know, so maybe he was getting kickbacks. I don't know. But a lot of stolen goods were going through the process. So everybody would get products, cigarettes, you know, with a stand, selling cigarettes, stolen goods, you know, could be anything. We were selling in the truck, pick up numbers, take a bookmaking action. So everybody was making money. He was the fence. People would go bring stuff to him, and he would give it out to the drivers because everybody wants to make a buck.
Yeah, I understand.
There was no killing. There was no stealing.
Yeah.
It was you would sell product, whatever it is. It could be a jacket, could be a coat, a jogging suit, sneakers, shoes. You know, and that was it. You know, so Joe he became very important to some people because he was the fence. Yeah. So they give you 100 cartons of cigarettes, right? We used to say like $2 a pop.
Yeah.
$2 a carton. Then you could sell whatever you want for. But you had to pay him back his $2 that he wanted for each carton.
Okay.
So if it was 100 carton, you owe him $200.
All right.
And then if you sold it for $3, you made $100. So you made.
Okay.
But that stuff was moving so fast.
Yeah.
How bad. Before you got it, people bought it because it was cheap.
Yeah.
There were cigarettes without a stamp. You know, we're bringing it from North Carolina or whatever, Virginia. And so everybody was happy. And Joe got very
how do you say, moved up in that league because he had that J.J. Dolly. I found him very not trustworthy. He wasn't like a Sicilian guy. He was more American, but third descent, third generation.
Interesting. So that's great. It's always nice to get that inside deal about how they do things. I like that. Like the cigarettes, get them without the stamp. Bring them in from North Carolina or Virginia or whatever. So I like getting that kind of inside information, the technical procedure way that these kinds of things work. It's easy to just say, oh, yeah, they dealt in stolen cigarettes, but let's get some details. Now, I had told a story one other time. Let's get into Joey Massino, the more dangerous side of Joey Massino. Big fence, big white-collar crime kind of guy, numbers runner, numbers operator, sports book, maybe some loan sharking. I know, like in loan sharking, they didn't all do that. Like Jack Amato, he said he couldn't do loan sharking. He tried to collect some money from a woman when the husband was in the wind, and she said, I can't pay. She said, I don't have enough money to buy food for my kids. And he said, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't be a loan shark. Joe Massino, he did have that edge to him. He could do what needed to be done, and he could murder, as I said before. Now, told this story one other time. I did a show about it's dangerous to go out or be married to or go out with Paul Castellano's daughter. Now, Gambino boss Paul Castellano was dating a guy named Vito Borelli. Now, Vito Borelli was kind of a jokester, and somebody it got back around to Castellano that Borelli was making fun of his appearance. He kind of looked like some goofy guy like Crazy Larry that did some kind of television ads all the time and acted kind of goofy and kind of had that long nose look. Paul Castellano have a long horse face and a big nose. Somebody told Castellano that Borelli compared those two, and he was making fun of him. So, and what I would say was a surprising lapse of professionalism and mob protocol. I mean, you don't kill somebody just because they make fun of you. You may have them beat up. You may hurt them bad. You may hurt their business, whatever, but you don't kill them. This became an opportunity for the brothers-in-law, Joe Massino and Sal Vitale, and really kind of their way in. Gambino family requested help from the Bonnanno. They didn't really want to be too close to this, I got a feeling. Only had a few people they could trust to do this for Paul Castellano. So the night of this murder, Joe Massino told Vitale, just go get a car and meet me at a particular location. Well, it was a storage container location. And Sal Vitale tells this story after he goes into witness protection, of course. And when he arrived, he said he saw Joe Massino standing there with Bonanno-Capo, Sonny Black, Napolitano, and other Gambino members and his crew members, John Gotti and Frank DiCicco and Angelo Ruggiero. Well, now this murder probably put Joe and Sal as upcoming made guys. Has probably put them on that track. And this is the middle 1970s. It was 1975, and the books are open over the next year or so. And by 1977, Rusty Rastelli's protege, Joe Massino, or Big Joey, will officially be made a member of the Bonannos. June 14th, 1977, is ceremony in a Queens bar. He's made, but Rusty Rastelli's in the prison at this time. And Carmine Cigar Galante, if you remember, Rusty Rastelli's the Bonnanno boss, but the cigar is back out. He's a long-time Bonnanno guy. He wants to get involved big time in heroin. He wants the whole family to be involved big time in heroin. And he is just taking over as the leader of the Bonnanno family. He's importing these Sicilian guys. He has 2 Sicilian bodyguards. They called them Zips during this time. And he's importing them in to, beef up the Bonnanno family and to take part in this heroin operation that he wants to make a lot of money out of. And he's got all these connections up in Canada. So he's assumed membership. He actually conducted Joe Massino's ceremony. And at the same ceremony, future Bonnanno boss Anthony Spiro was inducted, and a guy named Joseph Chili Jr. and a few others. They're beefing up the family. Galante will assign Joey Massino to James Galante's crew, and he'll later work in a guy named Phil Lucky Giassone's crew. At first, Joe Massino remains loyal to his mentor, Rusty Rastelli. And Rusty Rastelli is getting this feedback Galante's trying to take over, but he's stuck in prison. Joe's visiting Rastelli regularly, and Galante learns about this. So Galante's starting to make some moves on Massino and push him off to the side, put him on pretty thin ice. You know, you don't want the cigar Galante to not trust you if you're going to be in that business, because you're probably going to end up dead. He was vicious, cruel. He would kill somebody or have him killed at the drop of a hat. Rastelli makes some arrangements for Massino to go meet with the commission on his behalf and asked to be sanctioned to hit Galante over what's going on. Of course, he's got the heroin thing. He's got the fact that the commission had already approved of him being the boss, and Galante just trying to move in without the commission's permission. Of course, we all know what happened. He was hit, and that was the famous murder at Joe and Mary's Italian restaurant on Knickerbocker Avenue. He has those two Sicilian bodyguards, Cesar Bonaventre and Baldo Amato, and they just kind of like drift back in the background. Obviously, somebody got to them, and three guys come in and take out the cigar. And most famous mob picture ever, I think, of Carmine the Cigar Galante laying dead on the floor of this back outside garden of this restaurant with a cigar still stuck in his mouth. They say that the reporters and the police set that up, which they probably did. It'd be kind of unusual. It would clap down on that cigar, leaving his house, and somebody blasts him away with a shotgun. You know, he'd be scrambling to get away from that. So he called him the mastermind of the hit, and that's what I understand is he got the hitters. He manipulated everybody, probably got to the Sicilian bodyguards, and he set it up. He might have been the getaway driver. I believe he was. Anyhow, it's not important so much that he did orchestrate that whole thing, and that put him on a fast track for sure with Phil Rastelli, who's in prison. Another story about Big Joey Massino is he once sent a man to steal a truckload of merchandise, and it was in a truck hijacking by this time, dealing swag. There's huge money in dealing swag, and especially when you get into truckloads of merchandise. FBI agent Patrick Hogan was on his case, and he just was out, and they'll have like a broadcast. They'll listen to the local police channel as well as the FBI radio. Not much coming across the police radio or the FBI radio, but they'll have a police monitor in their car many times, and they hear a broadcast for a stolen truck. Somebody saw him drive off with his truck. Guy named Raymond Weems, I believe was his name, and Pat drove immediately to a warehouse area in Maspeth, and it's an area where they had many times found the empty trailers and trucks that had been hijacked. So he just drove to that area, and the guy shows up. So he jumps out and grabs him. While he's there dealing with the arrestee out of the truck, he probably had some New York City policemen there by this time. He looks up and he sees Joey Massino driving by slowly with his Cadillac watching. So Massino, rather than keep going, he can't quite believe what he sees, I think, and he turns around, comes back by. So Patrick jumps out and grabs him and identifies him and arrests him. And probably didn't, they may take him into the police station for a little bit and then kick him loose and then get him indicted later. Now they've got the driver. And he'll actually admit to Patrick that he was waiting for Joe Massino to then tell him what to do with the truck. But the driver refuses to testify, which you can't blame him. He lives in the area. This Maspeth area. It's like a small town. He's got family there. He just have to take his whole family and go in witness protection if he's going to testify against Joe Massino. And this isn't exactly a murder trial. He can do a tray. The guy told me once, I can do a tray stand on my head. I can do a tray, man. I'm not talking because I have to disrupt my entire life, and I'll get killed if you don't help me out here. So Massino goes to trial, but he's found not guilty because they don't have anything. But he happened to be in the area after the truck was hijacked. It looked like he was going to meet the guy, but it wasn't enough. Joe Massino was really hard to follow. They tell me, really tough guy to follow, and Pat Cogan spent his career watching him.
Joey was very hard to follow. He was very conscious of the tail. It was almost impossible to follow him. And he knew his neighborhood.
Yeah.
He knew when cars were out of place. He knew people very, very well known to the neighborhood. And if you were not part of the neighborhood, you were made as a law enforcement person. Joey was good.
So by 1981, Carmine Galante's dead. Rastelli is the boss, but there's dissension in the ranks. Rastelli spent so much time in the penitentiary, and on Rastelli's team, shall we say, are captains Joe Massino and Sonny Black Napolitano. On the other side, there's a group of three captains or capos, known as the three capos in the end: Al, Sonny Red Indelicato, Dominic Big Trin Trinchera, and Philip Phil Lucky Giasoni. The boss is in prison, Rusty Rastelli, as I said. There's a guy named Carmine Tutu Franchise. He is the nephew of Sonny Franchise of the Colombo family. He told Joe that these three capos were stockpiling weapons and planning a takeover with Rastelli in prison, and which means that they're going to have to take out Sonny Black and they're going to have to take out Joe Massino and take over their action, which is what would have to happen. So Joe Massino gets Rastelli's permission again. He goes to the commission, tells him what he's learned. He'll relate back that the commission told him, says, you got to protect yourself. You do what you got to do. Joey Massino interprets this as a license to hit these three capos. So he now starts his arranging again. This guy's a master at arranging hits. That was his thing, really. He gets here. He sends messages that we want a peace meeting and we're going to have a sit down. And we'll have it at a particular after-hours club. It's May 1981. And when you're having a peace meeting or a sit-down, nobody's supposed to be armed. Joey Massino plans this hit with perfection. He even brought in one of their associates, or actually a member of the family, which is kind of a sub-family under the Bonnannos up in Montreal, a guy named Vito Rizzuto, and an associate of his. They even bring them down from Canada. Again, he gets Bonanno-Capo's Franklino and Gerlando Ciacia to be there, to be like, okay, we're having the sit down of the capos. This is who's going to be there. This is the club is called the 2020 Club. They have a storeroom in there, and Salvatore Vitali will later testify that he brought in drop cloths for the blood and rope to tie up the bodies and to wrap them up with the drop cloths. And they had the two Canadian guys get in an adjoining room, and he instructed him, and he instructed everybody. Now, when you start shooting, be sure you know what you're shooting at, because I'm going to be standing right in the middle of the room. They bring the capos in. They go back to this storeroom. Gerlando, Ciacia, and Leno kind of back off a little bit. Salvatore is standing over at the side, and he says, he'll relate later that Massino greets the three captains, and Ciacia has the cue to let everybody know the Canadians are standing back in a closet. But they've got the door cracked. They can see out. And Ciacia runs his hand through his hair, and they step out. Vito Rizzuto supposedly yells, "This is a stick up," or "This is a hold up." And then the guns start going off. One of them's even kind of a machine gun. The walls of this storeroom are painted with blood and brains of Sonny Red Indelicato, Big Trin Trinchera, and Philly Lucky Giasoni. Later on, the FBI will learn that Sonny Black Napolitano had really wanted to involve a new associate that he had named Donnie Brusco in this murder. But Joe Massino had nixed that, saying, I don't know. I don't know this new guy. Let's not bring him into this. What if they'd have done that? They might have had to take that whole thing down early and save the three capos. That'd have been a hell of a surveillance. The bureau sitting around the outside, if they didn't know exactly what was going to happen, all of a sudden they start bringing dead bodies out. What do you do then? That's it's your worst case scenario when you got an informant and you got people on the inside. You don't know exactly what's going on. Now, interesting, if you remember, the Bonnanno family did a little cleanup for the Gambino. Well, the Gambino family does the cleanup and the body disposal, which they jacked up because all three bodies are going to be found. A kid playing in a vacant lot found the body of Sonny Red just a few days later, and eventually they'll find the other two bodies in this same area, some kind of a area where there wasn't anything there. It's known as the Hole. It's probably one of those big vacant lots that nobody wants to build anything there. So Joe Massino is a guy that likes to plan his hits out, as you can see, and this is two of them. Here's another one that he did. His lunch wagon driver, a fellow lunch wagon driver named Joe Pistone. Joe had been involved in a lot of cigarette truck hijackings and other cargo thefts for Joe, but he had taken an arrest or a pinch recently, as we like to say in Kansas City, took a pinch. And Joe was afraid he might talk, so he goes to Sal Vitale and he says, Sal, he said, you need to borrow a bunch of money from this guy. That I can't do it, but you can do it. So he borrows $8,000 from this guy, this Joe Pistone. Then he goes, he's got an old friend, a Colombo member, Carmine Franchise, and he gets him to take out Pastore, and then you won't have to repay the loan. But then he calls Sal to his deli, and upstairs apartment up above Joe's deli, Sal and Joe walk in, and there's blood all over the place. So Joe and him clean up all the blood. He said, Sal will say, he complimented me for a job well done later on. Authorities find Pastore's body shortly after. They just left it out in the street. Now, what he had told Sal early that he had planned on what they call a Blanca Lupera, or a white shotgun murder, in which that's what that means is you never find the body, but he decided to send a message to the body. If you find the body, there's a reason for it. They send it you a message. And Sal Polisi will later talk about this event because Joe Massino had asked him to dig a hole when he first didn't want the body to be found. He got Sal Polisi to dig a hole. Then for some reason they decided not to do it. So it's kind of an interesting story from Sal Polisi.
Cataldo was tight with him. Okay. And in the summer of 77, 78, Cataldo thought I wanted to get made. And he said, look, we got a piece of work. I go, what piece of work? We got to take this guy out. Joey Massino and I, we need to kill this guy. Now, I testified about this particular murder against Massino in federal court, but I didn't know the guy's name. This is just the way it was. When you're pulled in and said, look, you get ready, you can get made, all you got to do is go dig a grave. So I went out to Long Island. I spent all night by myself digging a grave. I got blisters. And I went back home and he says, wait for us to call you. We're going to kill this guy. You'll come pick him up and you'll go take him out to the Hamptons and you'll bury him. Okay, that's all I got to do. Because I was still on the fence. So like, okay, I can get made. This is 77, 78. I wasn't disenchanted at that moment because there was a lot going on and I was paying attention. So what happens is I don't hear from him the next day. And I had dug this grave. I had to make sure I had a rope. They told me to do it 6 foot. I'm only 5'9". So I dug the grave and I had to pull myself up out of that grave. So I'm at the football field 2 days later and Cataldo comes over there. Now you got to know how important the football field was in my life. First of all, I coached these kids. I had Peter Gotti's kid played for me. My kid played. Greg Ryder, who was the drug dealer with Gotti, his kid played. Even Frankie Gotti, the kid that got killed on the mini bike, was on my team temporarily. And it would be on a Saturday morning. It was Pop Warner. Cataldo comes over and whispers to me, you better go fill up that grave. I go, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Because last night, Joey and I, we got that guy. I go, I'll see you after the game. So then I go and meet him. I said, what in the world went on? Well, he said, we couldn't get him where we wanted to get him. And we had to kill him, in somebody's apartment. I think he said it was a guy named Tutti Franzese. So Cataldo was hiding in the closet. He gave me all the details. He was bragging about it. And Messina brings the guy into the apartment and Cataldo jumps out of the closet and strangles him with a wire. And Tutti Franzese, they take him and they dump him in Long Island City. So they didn't care. Now, I didn't even know the guy's name, but I testified against Massino. It had to be years later. I don't remember how many years. But I never knew the guy's name they murdered, but they were bragging about it. And that's one of the things, that I had to do as a favor to Cataldo and Massino.
Now, police had a little different story than what I had read about that this Colombo guy, Franchise, was involved in. He has a guy, and he's probably really got the guy who did it. Joe Massino was a guy that demanded loyalty of everybody under him. And if anybody tried straying away, he'd bring them back. Here's a little story from Jack Amato. Yeah.
The word gets out. That's it. There was times for me to move out, and I went to live in Lindenwood. So I sold a pizzeria. My father already went back to Italy, Sicily. He retired. So now I was on my own. Playing cards. I got involved with people from East New York. I started hanging out with them, which they belonged to the Gambino. And I was doing good there. So Joe Massino finds out, and he put the word out. Now he's already made. He's already a made guy. He tells the people that I belong to him. My nephew doesn't belong there. He belongs to us. So they got caught. I was doing good there. We were running the gambling, firework, the numbers. I was making money. And they loved me. Like they liked me a lot. They were not Neapolitans, but they loved me. And other people too, Fritzi Giovanelli too. I got along with him too.
Joe Massino was a real earner. When he ends up at the end of his career, he had millions and millions of dollars, and we know that for sure. It wasn't just some like Mayor Lansky. Whatever happened to Mayor Lansky's money? Well, supposedly he had all his money, but nobody ever saw it. Well, Joe Massino, they saw his money by the end. He had a lot of money, but the FBI is really struggling to make any kind of a case because he's up in upper management by now, and other people do the work, and nobody's going to testify. He gets his end of it, but they need to hide this cash. He's getting a lot of cash coming in, a lot. So the FBI, they go back to Elliot Ness, bring in the accountants. Let's go look at the taxes. They bring in a couple of forensic accountants, an agent named Jeff Sillett, and he subpoenas all of Joe's business records from his accountant. So he's got all these, legitimate businesses going with the roach coaches and supplying roach coaches, and he's got some parking lots and some different things like that. So as they pour over these, one thing they notice is Joe or his wife, Josephine, have won the New York State Lottery many times. Over a 5-year period, they showed over $500,000 in winnings. Now, who cashes that many lottery tickets over a 5-year period? Nobody, right? Well, they dive deeper into the lottery records, and they go back and they learn that they did have and cashed winning tickets, and they were paid this money from the lottery, but they were not the original winners. They were buying these tickets in cash from the real winners. He had a lot of connections to all the bodegas all over the city, and so the bodega owners would tell him about some customer who's a big winner, then he would approach them and just buy the ticket from them with cash. And the original owner, winner, would still owe the taxes, so Joe would give them enough money to pay the taxes on their winnings as a bonus. And then the winner gets their original winnings. They win $50,000 in the lottery, and Joe pays the taxes. But Joe gets a lottery ticket, and then he can turn it in, and he's got to pay the taxes again, but he gets to show a legitimate source of income, and then they write a check back out to to him, and he can put it in his checking account, and it's a money laundering deal. It was slick. He was smart. He was really bright guy. They learned a lot of other things out of these records too. During these years, Joe Massino is basically the boss. Rusty Rastelli's in prison all this time, kind of what you would call a street boss or underboss to Rastelli. And he's always loyal. The guy was always loyal, I'll say that, until the very end. Planned and conducted the murder of Carmine Galante and the 3 capos. In the end, he's embarrassed, though. His capo, his buddy, one of his big supporters, Sonny Black, is a victim of this FBI operation. Agent Joe Pistone infiltrates Sonny Black's crew through another Bonanno-Capo named Tony Mira, and buddies up with Lefty Ruggiero and really gets ensconced in the crew. He was so close to Sonny Black, if you remember, tried to involve this new crew member in the murder of the three capos. And then he wanted to give him the contract to murder Bruno Intellicato, Sonny Red Intellicato's son, who had supposed to be at this meeting and didn't go that night. And that was a kind of a dangled a promise that if you'll do this murder, we'll induct you into the family. Well, the FBI, they knew, enough is enough. You just can't. You can only go so far with this. I understand Joe Pistone really argued and really wanted to go further and further with this and maybe work some kind of magic. I don't know what, because he couldn't kill the guy. And in order for him to be made in the family, what a coup that would be, huh? Now, you heard at the start of this, Sonny Black and how he reacted when he was told that Donnie Brasco was an FBI agent and had infiltrated his crew. Commission was so mad and so embarrassed that they claimed that the Bonnanno family is no longer a mafia family. Joe Massino, of course, he's so embarrassed. He orders the murders of Sonny Black, Lefty Ruggiero, and Tony Mira. Now, Sonny Black and Tony Mira did get killed. Lefty was able to stay alive because he went to jail before they could get him. They didn't get him set up. He would probably rather have been killed as a member of the mafia, what I know about Lefty Ruggiero, but he ends up in jail. He's not going to kill himself, and they didn't try to get him in jail. It way too much trouble, I think, too risky. Joe Massino, after that, he really cracks down. I mean, he tells his capos and all his guys that don't ever mention my name. Like call to it the chin. I think they said just point to your face or to your ear or something if you're referring to me. He closed several of the social clubs that don't be meeting in these places. When he'd hold meetings with people, they'd go to real remote locations where they're like on vacation up in the North Woods or, down in Florida or someplace else. But, this is kind of like the ends in sight here. Things are not going well. There was another financial investigation that I need to tell you about, which was pretty slick. And it's going to uncover another money laundering scheme that will really be the undoing of Joe Massino. They found checks and W-2s paid to Joe Massino's wife and Sal Vitale's wife, like they were employees of a Manhattan parking company. And this overall company that then sells leases to parking lots was owned by a real wealthy but flamboyant entrepreneur named Barry Weinberg. Well, Barry Weinberg, just the kind of guy that the mob likes to get next to because they're big time, they're flamboyant, they take risk. They got a lot of money. They can put pressure on them. They're not a member. They're not protected by anything. And he was kind of a nervous guy anyhow. The Bureau figured we can turn this guy. So they targeted him personally for a financial investigation. And then they discovered he was earning millions of dollars that he was hardly paying any taxes on. And he was doing this mainly, they find out, because he had ex-wife problems. He was trying to avoid showing income because he owed a lot of money to his former spouses, and he owed a lot of child support, too. Child support, if you show anything at all, they're going to come and get it. They found in the end he evaded about $14 million in taxes. That's more than just, sloppy bookkeeping, I got a feeling. But now they got some leverage on Barry Weinberg. They can turn him, they're pretty sure. That's pretty slick. They don't want anybody to know that he's even under suspicion. It's real quiet, just nothing but books. Investigation, no surveillance, no arrest, no trying to make a case on somebody close to him. They drive by him, they catch him on the street, and they drive by him in a van, and they pull up next to him, and he's standing waiting across the street, and they have a big agent in the doorway, and they open the side door, and they reach out and grab him and snatch him and pull him in the van and take off. Like, oh, man, where'd he go? What happened to him? So they got him in there, and they say, okay, here's the deal. Here's what we got on you. And he broke. He broke before they got out of that van, I think, and he even agreed to wear a wire. And he was the kind of guy that go into Joe's joint, his restaurant or social club, and he could have frank discussions, and he could talk with other guys, other Bonnanno members about what was going on. Also, he was able to talk about something that he was involved with directly, and that was another Bonnanno member named Frank Copa. had been forcing Weinberg to sell him parking lot leases, just like Massino-Vitale had forced him to sell them parking lot leases and make it, they weren't really paying him any money for them or very little money. And then that was a way to launder cash income from their other illegal sources through the parking lots. He recorded over 100 incriminating conversations, and he really led to racketeering charges against 20 mobsters. And one of the most important racketeering case was on Massino's closest henchman and a real earner, Frank Coppa. Frank Coppa was already in prison on a 5-year stock fraud. Now, Frank Coppa, this was a guy, he's the one that really invented the pump and dump scheme, where they buy a lot of stock, or they force different stockbrokers to pump it up to their clients, to send out false information about a stock and to run the price up, and they get it to a certain point, and then they dump it. So pump and dump. And he'd have made millions of dollars doing that, and other mob guys had made millions doing that. And he's in jail on one of those, but it's only a 5-year bit. But new racketeering charges based on Barry Weinberg and some of the tapes that he had and some of the paperwork that they already had on this whole parking lot scheme could give him another 20 years for racketeering, and he was not willing to serve another 20 years for racketeering. During Frank Coppa's interrogation, after they arrest him and bring him in, he starts turning. As they debrief him, they're astonished in a way, because he's more of a white-collar crime guy, but he was involved in the planning and execution of Sonny Black. If you remember, Napolitano was a capo that proposed Joe Pistone and Donnie Brasco, or Joe Pistone / Donnie Brasco, for membership, wanted to involve him in the three capos. And, the famous saying that Sal Vitale claims that Joe Massino said when he had to kill Sonny Black was that he's owed a receipt for this lapse in security. Frank Coppa told them that how they got Sonny Black, or Sonny Black was not going to run from. Sonny Black knew that he had it coming. If you remember, his famous saying was, if you're going to hit me good, and the final shot to the head. He was a man. He was a stand-up guy. He said that Frank Leno and Stefano Canone had driven Napolitano to the house of a guy named Ronald Filocomo. Now, that's a Filocomo. I'm not sure how you pronounce that name. He was a Bonnanno family associate. Just let him use his house. He's going to have a meeting. Coppa greets Napolitano, and with Frank Leno, they push him down the stairs, and that's where they shoot him at the bottom of the stairs. And that's where he looks back up. They haven't killed him, and he's on his knees, and they say, hit me again and make it good. The agents were just astonished that Frank Coppa was be involved with that, but he was really close to Massino. He had made him a lot of money with these pump and dump stock schemes. He had also, like one time, paid for a whole trip for himself, his wife, and Massino and his wife to go to France for a week or two, and did nothing but, live in the nicest hotels and eat at the nicest restaurants. But now this is just going to be the tip of the iceberg for the Bonnanno family. Not surprisingly, Sal Vitale breaks down shortly after, because he is implicated in a lot of this stuff, and other Bonnanno members were going to break down and go into witness protection. My friend Doug Fencl, who was the FBI Bonnanno squad, had to say about this investigation and Joe Massino.
But after I retired, think about this, 17 years later, after I retired, I get a phone call from the United States Attorney's Office saying that they wanted me to come to New York and testify against Massino. So I was really surprised that they had finally gotten him, and I couldn't wait to meet the agents that finally got this, I guess you'd call him, elusive white whale of a mobster. And, of course, in my mind's eye again, this is the consummate gangster, so I'm expecting, when I meet these agents, I'm expecting a couple of veteran, grizzled, cigar-chomping, kind of door-kicking street guys. And instead, I meet these kind of two fresh-faced forensic accountants, Jeff Gillette and Tim McCaffrey. But after talking to them for a while, it didn't take long for me to realize these two people were masters at their craft. I mean, they were very, very sharp. And I was fortunate enough to spend the whole day with them prior to my testimony, and they explained the case to them. And basically, it's the same old story. It's like the Al Capone thing. Instead of doing a frontal attack on him, they went went through the bank records and the paper trail and got him through the back door. And it was just a fascinating day to listen to how they orchestrated this whole thing. So anyway, on the day I was supposed to testify, the assistant United States attorney who was the attorney in the case, the prosecutor, he wanted me to go in and look at all the exhibits that I was going to testify to, photographs and charts and that type of thing. And he said, we'll go in during lunch hour when everybody's out of the courtroom, and the only two people in there will be Joe and David Breitbart, his attorney. They sit way in the corner, and just ignore them, and we'll go in and look at the exhibits. So we walked in, and dead quiet in there, and I got about halfway down to the exhibits, and I hear, "Hey, Doug." And I turn around, and there's Joe waving at me. I looked at Andrus, the prosecutor. He's looking at me like, what in the world? I don't think he knew that I knew him from before. And I said, mind if I go over and talk to Joe? And he said, no, go ahead and go talk to him, I guess, if you want. Anyway, I go over there and shakes my hand, and he introduces me to his attorney. And this is like two old friends meeting off the street corner talking about old times. He was still, relaxed and confident, that same demeanor. And we talked for a while, and I said, Joe, I got to get back over here and look at these exhibits. And as I'm leaving, he kind of grabbed me and he said, Doug, he said, and this is quoting Joe, he said, what kind of a bullshit case is this they got on me? You could see the crack in his calm demeanor. I mean, he knew, I could see it in his eyes. He knew he was in trouble. And so that afternoon, again, I testified against him, and that's the last time I ever laid eyes on Joe.
January 9th, 2003, FBI brings in Joe Massino, Sal Vitale, Frank Leno, and a capo named Daniel Mogeli. And it's a huge racketeering indictment. And the charges against Massino include ordering the murder of Sonny Black. He gets no bail. A guy named Vincent Basciano takes over as the acting boss in his absence. Until this time, 2003, I would say, actually until 2002, Bonnanno family really was the only family that never had a made guy become an informant or a government witness that they know about. Some of them might have been informants, but they didn't know about it. And Joe Massino, they said, used to use this as a point of pride whenever he was doing a making ceremony. And he used it to rally his crime family at the Pistone infiltration. Hey, we've never had anybody turn rat. Hey, we never, we're those guys. But Sal Vitale is followed shortly after, and the next acting underboss, Richie Cantarella, and he was a participant in the Tony Mira murder. They're falling like dominoes. It's unbelievable. Joseph D'Amico turned state's evidence because he knew Cantarella could implicate him in that Tony Mira murder. And finally, the cheese stands alone, as we used to say. 3 more Bonnanno-made guys will choose to cooperate before Massino comes to trial. A guy named Tartaglione. He figures he's going to be indicted. He agreed to wear a wire while he was still out, and he starts gathering other information on him while he's out there before he actually comes in, and during those months and months before there's any trials. Massino puts out the word to Bonnanno family member that he wants Sal Vitale killed. Well, this is his brother-in-law. He's married to the dude's sister. But I understand the sister refused to speak to him and hated him after that. And after he left trial that last day, she never saw him again, is my understanding. He's not, Sal Vitale is dissatisfied with anything, and he really then starts flipping, and that's when it's just unbelievable that all the guys have flipped. There's a long-time Bonnanno associate named Dwayne Liesenheimer who started out as a car thief, stealing cars, and Joe was fencing him some way, and he flips. He's gone to jail before for Massino and not flip, but he flips. I think really kind of racketeering laws. RICO had a lot to do with this because everybody was looking at getting a lot of time. And because of the racketeering laws, they're going to charge Joe Massino with several murders. And they tell his attorney they're now going to ask for the death penalty. John Ashcroft was the attorney general at the time, and he wants to make a big splash and be the first guy to ask for a death penalty for a mob boss. Maybe the first one ever for a boss. I'm not sure. There's a couple of low-level guys back in the 30s that ended up going to the back in those days, the electric chair, old Sparky.
You know, everybody gives all the credit to John Gotti, and probably because he didn't roll over and Joe did. But in my view, and what I've seen and read about and talked to informants about and watched with my own eyes, I think Joe is probably more cunning and secretive and better manager, probably more ruthless than John Gotti ever was. I mean, John Gotti had one, what we would call daring hit, Paul Castellano. You think about Joe Massino, I mean, he was an integral part in the murder of Carmine Galante, maybe one of the biggest mob hits ever. Of course, the three capos that he orchestrated. And, I mean, those guys were formidable guys. Sonny Red, Big Trin, and Philly Lucky, formidable guys, dangerous guys. And, of course, Sonny Black, and you got Gerlando Shasha, the guy that headed Canada. You got Cesar Bonaventure, who was the head of the Sicilians. I mean, he took all these guys out. And, I mean, these were dangerous, formidable guys. So, I mean, Joe was a ruthless schemer. There's no doubt about it. Second to none, stone cold killer. When he rolled over, of course, I was surprised like everybody else. But, you know, when you think about it, this guy was survival of the fittest, man. I mean, always was. He killed friends, associates, and it's not surprising that he did it. I mean, but when he did that in 2004, I mean, Omerta was dead. Everybody was ratting on everybody else. I mean, half the family was testifying against him. And in true Joe Massino style, you know, if there's a threat against him, he's going to take care of it any way he could. So in this case, it was rolling over and testifying against those guys. And lastly, you know, when you think about it, his last 20 years, he lived in Cleveland or somewhere like that in total obscurity. I mean, here he was, the last Don, the last big mob guy in New York, and he lived this obscure life, you know, as far as I know, no books, no YouTube stuff, just did everything he could to survive. The guy was a survivor. If you're going to say one thing about him, I think that would be it. He was a survivor.
So in 2004, Joe Massino did the unthinkable. I mean, he is the first sitting boss of a New York crime family to become a government informant. Now, other cities had this. Kansas City's never had anybody go into witness protection that was a made guy. By the way, I don't know, it's a dubious honor at best, I guess, but here he is, sitting boss of the Bonnanno crime family, is going to become a government informant or a government witness. He's trying to avoid the death penalty, of course. He ends up pleading guilty to, I think, 8 murder charges. He gets 2 consecutive life sentences. Then he testifies against the acting boss, Vincent Basciano. He tries to get Basciano on tape confessing to his intent to have a prosecutor killed. He did admit to ordering the murder of another Bonnanno associate. He didn't get that murder of a prosecutor on tape. In the end, Massino acknowledges that he has $12 million, and mainly in gold bullion and a lot of other assets. I don't know how much time he did. He got time served by 2013, so he had to do 5, 6 years is all, kind of like Sammy the Bull, did all those murders himself directly and got about 6 years. 2013, he's 70 years old. He gets time served, given supervised release for the rest of his life, goes in witness protection. The Bonnanno family that he had really kind of brought back and made it into a Going Jesse, a money-making machine, is just a shell of its former self. They've just lost almost everybody, and as well as their once untouchable boss. So Joy Bagels, Joy Wagons, Big Joy, the last Don, he'll die. Joe Massino will die in witness protection 2023. He just died. I'd kind of put out some stuff on social media saying, hey, if you're out there, I'd like to interview you. And somehow Jeff Nadeau of the Sit Down podcast found people that had been around him while in witness protection. He had lived a quiet life in a Cleveland suburb. He liked the salad bar at Ruby Tuesdays, frequented a small casino, said he was once recognized, but he refused to be relocated, and whoever it was didn't tell anybody that cared enough to tell anybody else where the word got out. He'll eventually die in a nursing home in New York last year. He was 80 years old when he died. So that's the story of Big Joey Massino. He was, The Last Don is the book by Anthony DiStefano. It's a really comprehensive book. I would suggest that you want to know more about Joe Massino more than you ever wanted to know. Why, there's a lot more details in that book. I can only do so many here. So I've been planning on doing this for a long time. Doug Fencl, I see him all the time. He was transferred back to Kansas City, and he's given me other little tidbits. He didn't really want to do a whole show, but he'll give me little tidbits about things. He's been on me to do the story of Joe Massino because he was on the Bonnanno squad during these years, and he was such a bigger-than-life character and so successful in the mob. He was a very interesting mobster. Dangerous, but interesting, shall we say. And that's how we like them. So thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate everybody listening to me, and like and subscribe and forward this to your friends. Don't forget, I'd like to ride motorcycles. If you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, go to the PTSD hotline number. It's on the VA website. Hand in hand with PTSD, of course, goes drug and alcohol addiction, and former Gambino soldier or member or associate. I'm not sure what's he. I think he was a made guy. His dad was. He brought in as a legacy. Anthony Ruggiano. Anyhow, he has on his website, his YouTube page, he has a hotline number, and he's a drug and alcohol counselor down in Florida. Maybe you could get him to be your counselor. Tell me about it if you do. I don't know, like and subscribe. Well, I said that. Be sure and join my Facebook group. We got about 60,000 members. A lot of good discussions on there. A lot of good discussions on the YouTube channel. So thanks a lot, guys. 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 Thanks a lot, guys.